All right, welcome back, Powers on Sports Podcast. As I told you, we were going to tease. We are going to talk all things Lionel Messi to the United States, to MLS, and more specifically to Inter Miami FC. And the person who is right there on the scene covering this team every single day, Ian Hest, the founder and host of the Heron outlet, which is all things Inter Miami FC, and he covers South Florida sports. And he's been on the podcast a couple of times in the past. So big doings down in South Florida the last week or so. I know you've been busy, Ian.
Just a little bit, right? Just a little bit.
All right, talk to us about, obviously, let's talk a little bit of the Miami team first, and then we'll get to Messi. Obviously, this team had some expectations coming into the year, had a pretty decent run last year. They are struggling mightily, bottom of the table in the Eastern Conference of MLS. They fired the manager about a month or so ago, I believe. I know they did, but about a month or so ago on the timeline. Phil Neville's out. Just give us a quick sense of the team and where they're at right now.
Yeah, they had finished sixth in the Eastern Conference last year. And the expectation was that they would be better this year. The Phil Neville, who was the manager, like you had mentioned, set the expectation at top four in the Eastern Conference heading into the year. They currently find themselves bottom, absolute last 15th place in the Eastern Conference. And, you know, some of it has not been of their own doing. Some of it has been, they've been absolutely decimated by injuries. They cannot seem to catch a break right now. Two of their best players are out for the year, including their captain. So a lot of that has been very difficult. 10 of their 12 losses have come by one goal. So a lot of very narrow margins that this team probably deserves better, but hasn't gotten it. And now they find themselves in this position. They're 7 points out of the playoffs. We're 17 games in. That's the halfway mark of the MLS regular season. There's 34 regular season games. There's some other competitions that they're doing well in, like the US Open Cup, which they find themselves for the first time ever in the semifinals for. But you know, the league is where you're going to make your name. The league is where people are going to follow week in and week out. And right there, they're one of the worst teams in the league right now.
All right, so let's get to the big news. You and I actually kind of preface this. We talked right before the weekend before the MLS season started, and we talked about this being a possibility of Messi potentially coming here. There were some rumblings back early in the spring that was a possibility. He spurned the huge offer from Saudi Arabia, spurs the potential return to Barcelona, and there were some disparaging comments came out of Barcelona in the last week or so. Talk to me about how this deal came together and kind of what ultimately pushed Messi over the edge that he wanted to come here.
Yeah, I really have to give credit to the owners, the Mas brothers, Jorge and Jose Mas, who are the majority owners of Inter Miami. They had this on the radar basically back to 2019, even before Miami started playing games. They had wanted this. They had reached out and had tried to make proposals for this to happen. To even when COVID was really up and running and Messi was trying to decide where he was going to go, and he ended up in PSG in Paris, there was reignited conversations then. So this has been on the table for a while. And even into last fall, that's really when I started to believe that this was real, that they were serious about this, and Messi was serious about this. That this was basically on the verge of happening, I want to say last fall, right in the heart of college football season. And then I would say maybe when the World Cup happened, the success that they had, winning the World Cup, Messi winning the Ballon, the Golden Boot as the player of the tournament, that there was some sort of what if that Saudi Arabia became interested. PSG maybe wanted to get him back before all the downturn that happened with them, and Barcelona really re-entered the mix. And it wasn't until all of that cooled down that you sort of saw a recalibration back to Inter Miami, where they had always had the most normal, organized, not dramatic. There wasn't really these side circuses. Miami had maintained focus and maintained contact, and that really won the day in the end. It was very methodical, and I give the ownership a lot of credit because they knocked this out of the park.
Talk about the impact of Beckham being involved with the ownership and Don Garber with MLS. Obviously, we're going to get to the contract details here and just a couple things here in a second. But obviously, Garber I'm sure was pretty instrumental in these talks as well. Talk about Beckham and Garber and their involvement in this at all, if they have, how much.
Of course, we go back to 2007 when David Beckham came to the LA Galaxy, a record contract that included his availability to purchase Inter Miami or eventually Inter Miami for a discounted price. That was part of his contract back then. I will give them a lot of credit in the fact that they knew what needed to get over the line in this, and we can talk about the contract here. But really, David Beckham brought Messi to the floor. It was the other owners and the other management that really crossed it over the line. And so there obviously is the appeal of Miami, the appeal of David Beckham, the appeal of the United States of America, which is huge for Messi, who's owned a home here in Miami for several years. That this sort of made sense at this moment in time.
Was Miami the only franchise that had any chance to get Messi? Would there not be a New York? I mean, obviously, he's going to go to a big city. Was Miami the only option MLS wise?
In Major League Soccer, it was only Miami. That was the only option for him. I mean, not the only option for him. There's countless coaches that have been on record saying, well, we would have loved to have Messi. But for him, it was Miami in terms of heading to the United States. That was the only option.
All right, let's get to some of the details of the deal. Obviously, all of them haven't been finalized yet. We don't know all of them, but there's been talk of he's going to have an equity interest in the Apple TV deal. He's going to have an ownership stake in the Miami franchise. Give us a little bit of the details of some other integral things of this contract that made it worthwhile for him to want to come.
Yeah, I mean, there is. It's a little bit more complicated than most regular deals, right? In terms of the numbers, in terms of how many years and dollars he's going to get are going to be wildly different than the amount of total compensation he's about to get. He's going to get an equity share in the ownership upon completion of his contract and retirement. He's going to get an Apple TV, a share of the new subscriptions that come to the MLS season pass from there. And the big one that I really think is that he's going to get a percentage of Adidas, jersey, not just
merchandise,
jersey, but apparel sales from this. And, some people have already that are in the sports business world have already valued that at around $45-50 million a year. So you talk about that immediately. That's just on top of what he's already going to be making in these other areas, and that just goes to show what the total compensation of this will wind up being.
Length of contract. My view, just from the outside world, from a fan, I would guess it's probably this year plus 2 more would be my thought process. When he's 37, he'd be 37. What are your thoughts on the length of this playing part of the contract?
Yeah, like he had mentioned in his only interview that he's done since then, that things have not been 100% finalized, so we can't say for certain. But the likelihood is that this is 2.5 years, the rest of this year and 2 years. That lines up with the World Cup as well in 2026 with the USA hosting, which makes a lot of sense. It also lines up more so with Miami to possibly be able to open their brand new stadium at the very end of this deal. So all signs point to that. It could be a 1.5 plus an option. That's definitely on the table. There's a lot of contracts like that in Major League Soccer. But that's sort of the time frame that we're looking at right now.
All right, and as far as debut day, obviously there's been some chatter late July. Obviously it'll be a home game. Is that kind of the timeline that you think will probably be late July? It's going to take him another couple weeks to get the deal done and get it moved over and all that stuff, and he's going to probably train with the team for a couple weeks. Is that the timeline you think? Late July?
Yeah. So July 5th is the opening of the transfer window. So that's the very first date. From there, Inter Miami has 2 road games at DC and at St. Louis over the course of the next 2 weeks. I would doubt that he would start on the road. That doesn't really make much sense. And then the date that we're hearing a lot is July 21st. Why is that important? It's because that is the time when Major League Soccer actually takes a pause for a month, and they're going to have a brand new competition between Major League Soccer and Liga MX in Mexico called the Leagues Cup. It's going to be a single knockout tournament, similar to World Cup style of play. Inter Miami actually hosts their group in that with Cruz Azul from Mexico and Atlanta United, a team that Miami is very familiar with. That makes a lot more sense, having the group entirely in Miami and where they'll go from there. So July 21st is really the circle date that a lot of people have right now.
Last question on Messi, and we'll get to a couple of the soccer things. Talk about the thriving interest level in Miami FC or Inter Miami FC now. When the news was announced the last week or so, just with the diehard fans, with the people that you speak to as part of your podcast and publication, just talk about the hysteria down there in South Florida.
Yeah, it's wild, right? Every single road game that Miami will play for the rest of the year now sold out. tickets that went for $29 previously at Miami's home stadium, now going for upwards of $500 each time. It's an absolute buzz. There is obviously the anticipation palpable. The Inter Miami is talking about the possibility of trying to even bring in some more stands into the stadium right now, which, given the compact nature of the schedule, we'll see if that's even logistically possible. But there is definitely a ton of excitement right now around this. The fans could never in their wildest dreams have imagined that Leo Messi in South Florida, with the Argentinian population, with the South American population, with the excitement that they have wanted, could never have in a million years dreamed that this would be possible. So finding someone that isn't on cloud nine is much more difficult than finding someone who is.
And for the league, this is, for soccer fans in America, this is equivalent, if not a tad bit higher, to Pelé coming to the Cosmos back in the 70s, because he's coming off of a world championship, a World Cup. His the one thing he didn't have in his resume, he was the player of the tournament, even more hype. Pelé was more at the end when he came. Messi's, he's not in his prime by any means, but he's still elite when it comes to that. And the league's going to get to see that at least for a year and a half, I would think.
He's coming off winning the World Cup where he was the best player in the world, right? So this isn't some guy looking to retire like that Barcelona statement tried to make him out to be. This is someone who still can deliver a lot of goal creations. It wasn't too long ago that he was a 30 goal a year player. We're within a year or two of that.
Right.
So I think that really you were still getting at least one of the top 5 players in the world, even with the diminished in age or whatever you will say. The reason that I don't think that this is like Pele is because the league, this will be a huge indictment on MLS, right? The quality of their improvement over the past decade and a half since Beckham arrived, their investment in young up-and-coming talent that has been exported to throughout all corners of the world right now, which MLS has really thrived in. This will be a huge test to see, is Messi going to score 10 goals a game? I don't really think that he will, but is he going to be an afterthought? I don't think that as well. But him being a quality player in the league speaks to the league more than it does Messi. And I think that that's the huge advantage that the league's going to get out of this.
All right, listening to Ian Hest, the founder and content producer for the Heron outlet, covering all things Inter Miami FC. He's based out of South Florida, covers this team every week, every day. So he is dialed into what's going on in the world of soccer. We're going to talk a couple of the side. Do you see any in this transfer window you mentioned opening up here in a couple of weeks? Do you see any other big names from around the world potentially migrating to MLS?
Yeah, Messi has obviously linked a lot of people himself. I think that the first one that comes to mind is Sergio Busquets from Barcelona, a central defensive midfielder. That looks to be closer than not, and possibility to happen within the next week or two. Like I said, they have until July 5th to sort of make these dominoes fall correctly. There's been other names that have been thrown out, some less than others. I would say like a Luis Suarez, not very likely. Others like an Angel Di Maria is a possibility. Whether it's likely or not, well, it varies depending on who you ask. So there are these questions right now.
Explain to the audience how in MLS is it just whichever franchise offers the most? How does it get determined where these bigger name stars end up at it? I mean, obviously we know LA, Chicago, New York, Miami are the big markets. How do these other smaller markets get involved in some of these transfers?
Yeah, it used to be a lot more complicated. Now it's a lot less, and that benefits the premier markets, like you said, like Miami and LA. So they do have the ability to go out and make these big name signings. There are certain mechanisms in place. The designated player rules, the first one that comes to mind, you can only have 3 of those players on your team, and you can sign those players to $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion, $4 billion if you want. But you can only have 3 of them on your team. Miami currently has 3 that will fall below 2 with some roster mechanisms that they can use. It's called allocation money. We don't need to get too much in the weeds of that. So they will fall below that threshold in order to sign Messi. But from there, they'll need to maneuver things. I'll remind you that Inter Miami is currently under the biggest sanctions ever given out in the history of Major League Soccer. They did it for having too many designated players a couple of years ago. Those sanctions last throughout the rest of the year. So it won't be until November or December when those sanctions really get released and they'll have a lot more money to spend.
Can you see with Messi making this move, can you see a year from now, Ronaldo being the next guy that comes this way?
You know, Ronaldo was closer than a lot of people probably know to joining Kansas City in the offseason. And there was a lot of talk about Sporting Kansas City being in on that. I think that ultimately the Saudi Arabian deal was best for Ronaldo. He recently signed a new deal, so I don't know exactly the details of that as to when he would be able to come to Miami. He's older as well, a year older than Messi. So I don't know if those things will line up, but it's definitely a possibility. He was interested once before, so there's nothing to say that he wouldn't be interested again.
All right, last thought, and I'll get you out of here. Give me a thought on Man City over the weekend. They beat Inter Milan to win the treble, and they win the UEFA final 1-0. Just the thought of Man City finally winning the treble and all the pressure on them, Pep Guardiola and all those guys, and that whole Holland with his unbelievable year. Just talk about Man City a little bit and their pursuit and conquering of the treble.
Well, it's a little bit easier when you don't have any financial rules that inhibit you at all in what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, I think of the Yankees in the early 90s. Yeah. Would we be amazed that they were able to do this? No, we wouldn't. Man City has spent the most. They are the best team, and they should win all of this. It's been a little bit surprising that they haven't. So I mean, kudos to them. They are the best team on the planet, and they were the only ones that were going to stop themselves, and they wound up completing all of this, and they are one of the greatest teams, if not the greatest team of all time.
All right, I got one more question I just thought about that I got to get your thought on. Where's the national team going for a coach? What's going on with the national team and the coach?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of speculation out there. Obviously, Jesse Marsch is still available. The former Leeds manager, who is an American coach. I would say if you were a betting man, that's probably the first place that you'd go. He said that he doesn't necessarily want to do that, though. So I don't really know where that goes. They're into their second interim manager right now. There's a great coach in Caleb Porter that's available right now. He's more of an MLS stalwart. I don't know if he fits the mold of a national team coach. And there's, some other national team coaches from other countries that might make more sense. So this is going to be a very interesting process. This is one that U.S. soccer needs to get right. This is probably the United States' greatest chance in our lifetime to make a prolonged run in the World Cup, however long you believe that to be, whether it's a quarterfinals, semifinals, or beyond. That they need to get this one right with the talent that they currently have.
All right, one more now. I just thought about this too while we're talking.
We'll talk all night. It's okay.
Yeah, a big kind of an under the radar move. A big player that's committed to the United States, the kid from England. Give us a little talk about the kid from England. What is he, 19 years old, forward? Yeah, he's a striker. The thing that the U.S. needs more than anything is a goal scorer, and this guy's a up-and-coming goal scorer. Give us a little insight on the British kid that's committed to the U.S.
So he's a youth Arsenal product. I'm going to butcher his name. Everybody does. Forlan Balogun. That's not correct, but
that's close enough.
We'll learn it within time. I assure you. He's a quality striker. I mean, really quality striker. It begs the question of how he's going to fit into the system, whatever system that might be, because he currently has a very specific style of play. That play is very good. Don't get me wrong. But where it fits into this U.S. men's national team will be a bit of a question. But very talented player. Again, to make the baseball analogy, you'd call him a 5-tool player. Right. There is no weakness in that game. There is just excitement and potential. And so it just goes to show where this U.S. team was compared to 10, 15, 20 years ago. They got world-class players right now, and the sky's the limit for what everybody thinks is possible if they get it right. U.S. soccer has a tendency to, trip over its own feet and get it so away. If they get it right, then there's a lot of potential here.
That's great, man. All right, great content, Ian Hest. Tell all the fans where they can find all your great work covering Miami, Inter Miami. I keep saying Miami FC, Inter Miami, MLS, and all the such.
Yeah, we're at the Heron Outlet, the Heron Outlet. 3 words all together, at the Heron Outlet, on Instagram, on Twitter, Twitch, wherever you get stuff, wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Apple, Google Play, Spotify, etc. And if you want to subscribe to our newsletter, theheronoutlet.substack.com.
And are your Heat and your Panthers done? Is there any hope there to steal one in 7 games?
They're not done until they're done. Burn the boats. We're riding until it's over. You got to win 4. You got to win 4.
That is true. That is true. Well, Ian, keep up the great work, man. Appreciate the awesome insight on the Messi deal, MLS, and all things world soccer. And we will be in touch as Messi makes his debut, we think, at some point in late July. Keep up the great work, man. We'll be right back. Powers on Sports Podcast.